I think what people forget, even with leadership, I'll say thank you for your partnership or thank you for your support. I I like Hall of Fame. I dislike Hall of Shame. I'd rather be positive with the communication than have a negative communication.
And TJ, we mentioned in the beginning your sustainability program. So I'd be really, really happy to hear about that as well.
So it actually stemmed from
Welcome to FinOps in Action. I'm your host, Alon Arvat. Each week, I'll sit down with FinOps experts to explore the toughest challenges between FinOps and engineering. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action. Hello, everyone, and welcome to FinOps in Action. Today, I'm really happy to have a very, very special guest. He brings with him over 25 years of IT experience, and in the last 15 years, he was focused on public cloud and technology optimization. He created and built a cloud sustainability program to track CO2 emissions. We'll definitely talk about that. And he was a speaker at FinOps X and at reInvent. I'm happy to welcome lead architect for platform economics at MGM Resorts International, TJ Johnson. TJ, how are you doing today?
doing great. It's a beautiful day in Southern California. I can't complain.
Okay, I wish I were in South California today. And TJ, why don't you share with us what is the one thing you got wrong when you started your FinOps career?
I'd say it's more that I thought I had to do everything myself and that I was, kind of this island. But come to find out that that's not really how you should do it. You rely on teammates, you rely on other people, you work collaboratively with people. So I think when I started off, I thought it was something that I would have to do a lot of the work myself. But if I would like to say, if you do it right, it's all about partnership.
Yes. And I think that is a very common a mistake because basically you're the only one that has FinOps or cloud economics in your title. So I think people would tend to think, okay, they should do all by themselves. But I think the foundation like to say that the FinOps is everyone's job. So can you share with us how over time you started connecting and engaging with other people and make sure they also take part in the FinOps efforts?
So I think it was more as I matured in the practice, I recognized that what is important is the soft skills, developing relationships, building trust. That's as important as you figuring out what your spend is. It's about, working with people, partnering up with people and literally using that word, thank you for partnering with me. Right. And it's reinforcing that in your language and in your speech as you go through the relationship as well. Trust was built on, um, digital capital, so to speak. Right. So I would provide information. There would be some trust because it was good information to help them make decisions. And that capital for each of us continued to increase. And so over time, we got to a point where we trusted each other's information and each other. And it got to a point where, it really was a good partnership.
Wow, that's really, really good. I think that thank you for partnering with me. That's a really, really powerful sentence that I think anyone should use because I think, and that's true for every FinOps person, like every person you collaborate with, FinOps is not his only job. He has to prioritize it against many other competing priorities, and it's always very, very hard. And like if they make the effort to collaborate with you, we should definitely be thankful or at least acknowledge the fact that they made the move
Exactly. Yeah.
and acknowledge. And when you say that, you collaborate with these people, you thank them for your partnership. Are you talking about engineers? Are you talking about other personas as well?
All personas. I think what people forget, even with leadership, I'll say thank you for your partnership or thank you for your support. For engineering teams, again, I, like what I found out, right? I don't work in isolation. I have to work with other people. I can't do everything myself, right? And nor should I do everything myself, right? So, that level of partnership really is important, and those relationships are really important. When I first started MGM, there were some issues with my laptop. I think I went to 2 or 3 laptops the first 2 months. And so I really couldn't get a consistent, look at information because the laptops were having some issues. And I won't say the brand, I'm just saying I had some laptop issues. Um, but what I focused on was really building those relationships during that time when I didn't have access, right? Because I was remote and most of our team had developed to be remote as well. There were people all over the US that I worked with constantly, and there were people in Las Vegas as well. But I think that really set the foundation for the type of work that I'm doing today and the level of partnership that I have today. So again, still the same thing of relationships are key. Soft skills are key, you know, build that emotional intelligence, understand, behavioral models. All of that helps you, understand how people listen and how they want to be spoken to. So it's definitely a big win for everybody.
And maybe you figured out a very cool concept, TJ, in the first few weeks of onboarding a new FinOps person. Take him his computer, go walk around, meet people, get to know them, develop relationship. This is the basis for your work.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. I don't want to go through that again, but I'm just saying do that as well. Right.
Yes, yes. It's actually worth a shot, for our listeners, if you onboard new FinOps people, consider, I don't know, maybe disconnect them with some of their data platforms and get them to meet people as part of the onboarding process. That's actually can be a nice practice. And TJ, you talked about the fact that, you want to thank them for their partnership. You want to acknowledge it, not take it for granted. Do you find yourself investing time in getting people engaged, in getting them motivated, or understand the priority of FinOps?
I do spend some time with that, and it really depends on kind of what we're doing. My position has kind of morphed over time a little bit. So, because we are not just public cloud, my team public the economic platform is not really just public cloud. It's private cloud, it's SaaS, it's network, it's telecom, it's mobile. So, that expanded a lot of the people that I speak to and the people that I partner with, right? I think some of the challenges that we still have is kind of understanding what each other does. And I think that's fairly natural, especially if our what we do expands, right? And so they think of you as one way versus another, right? So I may be having a conversation with a VP about, engineering team optimizations. The next hour I'm talking to them about the SaaS applications that they own, right? So the conversations definitely do shift quite a bit, and it just depends on what the context of the conversation is.
Yeah. And do you have some practical advice on how to incentivize them, maybe using gamification techniques or holding them accountable or creating certain ceremonies to acknowledge or to measure? Any practical advice?
I I like Hall of Fame. I dislike Hall of Shame. I'd rather be positive with the communication than have a negative communication. Uh, they know who they are, right? If they're not making the cut, right? They know who they are. And, are they getting better at it or not? I think that's, depends on how you want to measure that. But I can always find a positive reason to acknowledge a team that I'm working with, right? It could be for optimization. It could be for, one event that was handled incredibly well. It could be for different things. So I like to keep the conversations positive and find positivity in how we communicate with them as well. So I have done that. Gamification, yes, to a point. But I think if you add financial incentives, it's better, right? So you would go to a VP and say, "Hey, can I have a budget of 5 or 10,000 for the year? Is it okay if I provide a bonus of some sort for being the best at optimization for the month, and it's like, $500 for a month, right? Something like that, right? So things that you can do, and you can have a larger one for the year. And I've done that before. But I think to some point, gamification kind of stops working because it ends up competing with the other parts of their job.
Yeah.
And at some point, they're going to make a decision that the money's not worth it. I got to keep my job over the $500. So you're going to focus on that. So you have to find a way to incorporate kind of the benefits of optimization into their cultural, viewpoint of how they do their job, right? I often talk about the world of an engineer has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. It's not just sit down and code with a can of Mountain Dew and some Hot Pockets. That's, in the US, that's a very strong euphemism for, describing an engineer, right? It sleeps at 2 o'clock in the morning. But, now it's more a point of, okay, now you have to know how to code. You have to know the infrastructure. You have to know how to manage. You have to be accountable. You have to be, smart with your spend, right? Those have shifted where engineers really didn't think about budgets before. But now you should think about budgets because that puts you in line for a promotion. That puts you in line for building a career around strengths that you need to build, right? And so that gets you to that next point, like the soft skills I was talking about before. But if you just want to code, you'll probably stay a coder. You'll never probably go up to management. You'll probably never understand, what that career path is for you. So you need to be able to change as an engineer with what's important for the business these days to be able to understand how to then manage that moving forward.
That's fascinating. And we actually had a similar conversation with Mike Rosenberg when we made the episode together. And I'm curious because Mike also talked about it. Do you find yourself explaining engineers that, hey, if you will do better FinOps, you'll be better engineers, and that will be amazing for your career? Is that something that you actively educate them?
I do at times. Some already know it, right? But for those that maybe haven't gotten to that point yet, I do have conversations about that, I want to support you in building your skill set. How can I do that from a FinOps perspective to make you better at what you do with your job? So that's what I do. I do some mentoring. I do a lot of different things around that.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, I share this perspective. And I think that in 10 years from today, it will be very clear that if your infrastructure is inefficient, you're not doing as good job as an engineer should do. Like you could be a better engineer if you're not making sure your infrastructure is efficient. And if you look back,
and cost effective.
Yeah, of course, and cost effective for sure. If you look back, 10, even 20 years, quality wasn't part of the engineer responsibility.
Yeah.
Like was a different department for QA that was responsible for quality. And today, I don't think there is an engineer organization in the world that doesn't see himself responsible for quality as well.
Yeah.
And I believe FinOps will go through the same process as well. And I'm kind of curious. You mentioned about the rewards you were trying to give to engineers, which is a really cool concept. You mentioned it will only work for a certain period of time. I'm curious if you saw it creating like misaligned incentives with the company. For example, people are to begin with provisioning a less efficient infrastructure just to save on cost afterwards and win the reward you're offering.
Well, I'd say that there are other pieces of their puzzle that make sure that performance is in there, right? And so, you have to have it perform. Doesn't matter what the cost is. You have to have it perform, but you can include cost in that performance criteria. And so that's the thing that we just want people to think about, because you'll find oftentimes they'll go with the highest level tier, they'll go with the largest, instance, they'll go with, whatever, a premium value kind of service, right? But they don't start at the basic service because maybe basic is all they really need. So they'll start high, but that's always been the model for cloud, right? You buy the bigger box and then you scale down. The model's supposed to be start small and grow into the box that you're going to be in, that you're supposed to be in. That's the real model that people forget because they don't have time. They just want to go performance immediately. And then they eventually back down. That's where all the waste is. So if you start smaller and then grow up into it, just why not choose autoscale? We still have so many people not using autoscale, right? I mean, it's a very basic function now.
Yeah, absolutely. And my personal belief is that you can also balance it with other metrics that will balance that out. For example, not only looking at how much waste you cleaned up or how efficient you got, but also look at how much waste was created to begin with. And then you kind of have like a balanced out, metrics that make sure you don't create misincentives. Have you tried it, or do you have any thoughts about this concept?
I have, and I think we talked about this before around measurements, right? So, measurements are a key thing, and a lot of people rely on KPIs as measurements, and I look at KMIs, which are key momentum indicators, because we as FinOps practitioners, we don't look at short term, right? We look at long term. We look at patterns, and that's how we start making decisions. Are we effective at what we do, right? So KPI may be a quarter, right? You look at it and then you move to another KPI because it's another priority in the business. But you can move those KPIs to be more, longer term KMIs that give you that key momentum indicator and talk about that. So if you're building the right measurements around those things, the problem will actually solve itself. All right. And so, and if you find a measurement is no longer, giving you what you're looking for, it's no longer an effective measurement. Like if it shifts from a decision-making measurement to an awareness measurement, you need to find another measurement, or you need to add another measurement to that, because all of your measurements should require an action. Otherwise, why are you measuring it? I don't want to know something because I need to know something. I want to know something because I can take an action. Right. And so for me, that's how that model kind of works out.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously, everything should be actionable. Otherwise, don't waste your time.
We have so little time as is, right?
That's 100% true. And I know that measurement is a topic that's close to your heart because I know you went on stage to talk about it. Can you share with us a bit more about KPIs versus KMIs and maybe give us an example of how you transition a KPI to a KMI?
Sure. So it really depends on kind of everybody measures a little bit differently. It's like, what's your goal? Everybody's got a slightly different goal, right? So what are you trying to get to with your measurement? Um, you know, we looked at, there's operational measurements, there's technical measurements, there's financial measurements. So there's different categories of measurements that you can put in place. I think an easy one is cost per gig of RAM, right? It's an easy one that everybody should be able to figure out. Now, is that a financial or a technical one? So I look at that more as a financial. But at the same time, the cost per gig per RAM, let's say that you have a KPI to bring it down to a certain level. Right now, it's whatever cost per hour, and then you want to bring it down to 20%, 10%, whatever that is. But you want to track that over time. And you want to track that across multiple clouds if you're multi-cloud, because then you have the ability to start looking at it. If you've got a Kubernetes strategy in place and you're implementing that across multiple clouds, even on-prem, right, you can move stuff around. So having that KPI move to a KMI, so you're looking at it over long term, and now you're tracking multiple costs across multiple clouds. So you're always looking to see who's the lowest cost if you can, and then you can move workloads for a period of time. I recommend if you're going to move a workload from cloud to cloud, at least keep it for 6 months, and then go and figure out if that's still the right place for it to move to. But yeah, so you can move initial short-term KPI to a longer-term KMI, and you're still tracking it over time. That's the big point. It's just tracking the pattern. And you want to ensure it's either above a bar or below a bar or within a range. So that's typically how you look at the measurements, and whatever that scoring is that you've created, that's the way to handle it.
Yeah, and one more thing I'm taking from what you're sharing here, TJ, is that KMIs can also be used to track progress and success of a project, like a migration project, or you have now a big architectural change. It's gonna have obviously influence on the cost, but hey, try not only to track the cost, but also track the progress of the project itself. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, you can do that 100%. Because there's so many different categories of measurements you can incorporate into it.
Yeah, and do you have, TJ, maybe an example for a unique KMI that you measured in the past, just to give some more ideas to our listeners?
I'm a huge fan of unit economics measurements. And so one KMI that I do is cost to produce, cost to serve, right? So non-production accounts costs versus production account costs. And you'll find that if you have a higher cost to produce, you have a lower maturity in your development cycle, right? That means that your production is going to be much less. But as you move to more cost to serve, you have a higher amount of cost to serve, you have a higher maturity, and that means that you're doing things differently from the deployment perspective, and you're able to then look at your production costs, which is the cost to serve. So you start looking at the differences, and you can start to see patterns that will emerge as you track this, and you'll see patterns emerge by team, by engineering teams, right? You'll have multiple engineering teams that have the same technology stack, but in development, it's 3 times more expensive than another team. Why? What are they doing differently? Why are they wasting so much? So you start to see those patterns kind of emerge as well. So for me, the cost to produce, cost to serve is one that I implement almost immediately when I come into some place.
And I really like the term cost to serve because it connects you immediately to the business. When you say unit economics, sounds like something very, very financial, high level. And when you talk about cost to serve, that like automatically attached to how much you price your products to your customers.
Can be, yeah. Some people take their cost to produce as R&D, right? So it just really depends on how they want to categorize it and what they want to do with it.
Absolutely. That's actually a good term that I think many people should definitely adopt. And TJ, we mentioned in the beginning your sustainability program. So I'd be really, really happy to hear about that as well.
So it actually stemmed from a request that I got a couple of positions ago around can you forecast our sustainability? And so the way that you can do that is starting with your forecasting model that then you can bring over to sustainability. So if you forecast by service and you understand your carbon unit per service, you can forecast your carbon, right? Because if you forecast by unit of measure, right? So I have 100 gigs, I'm going to do 100 gigs a month for the next, 24 months, whatever it ends up being. I know that it's, 2.5 grams of CO2 per 100 gig per month, right? So I can actually forecast out my sustainability. But the challenge is the reporting from the cloud providers, right? So I always had to create my own model around the sustainability because if you understand the protocol, then you understand that there's 3 components to the protocol, right? And so the first one is typically your internal CO2. So it could be physical buildings, it could be stuff like that. The second one is either you're going to select either location-based or, non-location based. So that means that you're looking at the power that comes in. And the most consumable part of this is your supply chain, which is scope 3. And supply chain can be as high as 95, 98% of all of your carbon emissions, right? So you look at AWS focuses on scope 1, scope 2. Azure has scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. GCP has scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. If you look at the CO2 emissions for each scope by scope, the carbon footprint teams for each of the cloud providers do mostly a pretty good job. Although, again, AWS is really hard because they don't do scope 3 and they only have 3 or 4 different things that they report on. So it's probably not the best data. So you infer a lot from the stuff you learn from the other ones, right? So I know if scope 1 and scope 2 is X amount, I know that's probably 2 to 5% of the total emissions. And there's a whole bunch more that we're not counting that they're not reporting to us, right? So you have to be able to understand. GCP does a really good job because they report by, I think it's SKU. So carbon emissions by SKU, which is crazy level of detail. I think they started reporting water that they use and all kinds of stuff, but the basic CO2 emissions. You can actually map all of that to your forecast. You can map all of that to whatever you want to do. So for me, that's how I started. I started building the model because the cloud providers didn't report everything. And so I made my own model around that because their model is an estimate. Who's to say their estimate is any better than my estimate, right? So I said, this is my new estimate. And what that does is at the very least creates a baseline that we start with. If we use their numbers, my model's numbers, it doesn't really matter. It's still a baseline. As long as you use the same calculations moving forward, then you're tracking at that same kind of level and intensity. So that's kind of what I started with, and that's how I started reporting. And so, yeah, it's made it on a few, public companies 10Qs. It's made it some definitely leadership reporting. We do it every year. Technology has a very low carbon footprint compared to other parts of the business. I mean, we're in hospitality, right? I think, the cows and the beef have more CO2 than technology will ever have, right? So, you got to think about things like that, right? So we're a small part of the larger picture, but if you're mostly a tech company, then it becomes a big part of the picture, right? So it just really depends on what industry you're in.
Of course, very interesting. And do you use these sustainability reports only for leadership and ESG reporting, or is that also something you're using when you're engaging with engineers?
So it really depends. Again, building those relationships, get to know what motivates people, right? There are, I want to say somewhere 15, 20% of people are motivated by saving the planet, CO2 emissions. And yes, I can tie back an opportunity of savings back to how many trees we're going to be saving, right? I can do that. It's not that hard to do. But the reality is that it's a better for a leadership thing and the ESG teams within an organization, because most of the companies I've worked for are public companies and they have a sustainability, reporting process in the ESG, right? So E for environment. And so, you've got a lot of that pressure that the company needs to perform, right? And so we do provide that information for leadership mostly. But when we look at the forecasting of that, I will tell the forecast to the ESG team and say, this is not real numbers. I'm just making up a number, 500 metric tons of CO2 last year. We're forecasting 700 for next year, right? And they come back and say, well, can you make that 500? Can you make that the same as last year and not get to the 700? And the answer is maybe. Because the only way to reduce CO2 emissions is reduce usage, right? Reduce consumption, right? If you buy an ROI, that's not reducing that. You're reducing your unit cost. That's not reducing your actual usage, right? So people have had that confusion before. But I think if you look at your optimization and your FinOps program and how you want to reduce usage, right? Even if you reduce a tier, you're not always reducing usage, right? So you need to actually reduce usage. That's the only thing that saves CO2. So, you just really got to be clear on what your program is. And if you can save 200 metric tons, figure out where your largest, consumers of CO2 emissions are, right? Is it instances? Is it the use of a database? Is it a SaaS model, a PaaS model, or is it an infrastructure as a service, right? So figure that out, focus on those areas, mostly going to be PaaS. Focus on those areas and see what you can reduce from a usage perspective. And you may be able to get back to the same level that you had last year. So things like that. You just need to understand the numbers from a carbon unit consumption perspective, and then you should be able to keep it flat from year to year as best you can, at least for your part of it, right?
And I guess that makes ESG another persona that the FinOps person need to collaborate with.
It is. Absolutely. No, I mean, honestly, between platform economics, we touch pretty much every part of the organization, right? And that's the fun part for me. I mean, because of SaaS, I work with the people that make reservations for the cabanas by the pool. What does that have to do with FinOps, right? But it's still part of that process that you're managing that software. You're making sure that the user count is correct for the software, right? You're optimizing as best you can. So, who would think that it would coincide with, cabana rentals or reservations, right? So just kind of weird stuff that pops up, and, we get to touch a lot of different parts now. So that's great.
So we started the conversation with the fact that you didn't get enough people and organization involved in the finance process. And we're finishing with the fact that you work almost with anyone in the organization.
A lot of people, for sure.
That's awesome. Cool. And TJ, I think me and the audience would love to learn more about you on the personal level. So today you live in Irvine, California, right?
Yes.
Are you originally from there? How did you get there?
Let's say my address. No, I'm just kidding. What?
How did you get there?
Oh, I'm a native Southern Californian. I've always lived in Southern California. So either Los Angeles or Orange County.
Okay. And based on your everything you have behind you, so I see 2 books.
Yeah. Wow.
I see 2 books. Are you into books?
I love reading. Yeah. So the last one I had is my finger right there. So this is executive presence, right? So it's really, again, going back to the soft skills, right? How do you present yourself, but more, how do you interact with people, right? So what is the message that you're giving about yourself? What is your brand kind of stuff, right? So how are you working in that space? So that's a nice little book.
And I think all of us want to read more books. So why don't you give us a tip on how to find more time for reading?
Wow. Honestly, you have to make the time. I mean, there's no magic bullet for that one at all. You have to make the time, but make sure it's something that you find value in, right? I mean, sure, you can read trash. That's fine. And sometimes that's a lot of fun, right? But I tend to lean more towards stuff that'll get me to that next level, that is also really interesting to me. Because if it's not interesting, why you're reading it, right?
I'm with you, and I can tell that personally, I read mostly nonfiction, and I try at least every evening to find like 30 minutes to read, at least. And most of the time I'm able to do so. Very often, no.
For me, it's more weekends.
Weekends.
I find time on weekends, usually in the mornings.
In the morning. Okay, cool. And anything else you'd like to do for fun?
I am a master gardener. So we work for University of California, and we do a lot of public speaking around helping people how to create a garden, how to manage their garden, integrated pest management, irrigation, you name it, anything along those lines. That's stuff that we educate the public on. So I do that. I also do disaster response. I work for an organization called Team Rubicon. I volunteer for an organization called Team Rubicon. And we help people either after a disaster, or we help them with community projects. Great organization. I hope people will look into it. It's a veteran-led organization for the U.S. And we do a lot of good work globally too. So we can get deployed to go somewhere globally if we have the right skill set that fits that right particular situation.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Well done. And I also see you have a collection of the small dolls. I forgot how they're called.
So the pops,
Yeah.
these pops, yeah, I don't want to say hundreds, but I have a lot. I mean, I can tilt the camera up a little bit and you can see there's tons up there. It's 3-4 rows high. And yeah, I've got a lot.
It does look in the hundreds, I have to tell you.
It probably is. It probably is. Probably, yeah. A little bit ashamed to say, but yeah, I just enjoy them. And they're all very personal. I'm a big movie buff, so they all have relations to a movie or a show or something, right? So, or a nostalgic thing when I was younger.
I actually need to start a collection myself. That's it. It's about time.
Just give out a list for your birthday or for every occasion, and then you'll finally get a whole bunch. That's what I did. Years of putting lists together for people. Oh yeah, hey.
Okay. And we got a tip on how to read more books, and now we got a tip how to start your own collection. Great. And TJ, I think that our listeners really enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot. If people want to reach out and ask you questions, what is the best way to do that?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, so it's Anthony TJ Johnson, and you'll see this shiny, happy face, and you can go ahead and send an invite out.
Okay, sounds great. You heard him. Reach out via LinkedIn. TJ, thank you so much for joining us and give me and the audience a lot of inspiration across the board, professionally and personally.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I would also love to thank our audience again for joining us, for listening in. I'm sure you enjoyed it and learned a lot. I personally learned a lot and enjoyed it very much. If you got some value, please tell your friend about the podcast. TJ, thank you again. This has been another fascinating, fun episode of FinOps in Action. Hope to see you next time. That wraps up another episode of FinOps in Action. Thank you for joining. For show notes and more, please visit finopsinaction.com. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action.